Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March 2025 Council Agenda Briefing. I'd like to start by acknowledging and paying our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and to their elders, past and present. I'd also like to just advise everyone that the video and audio recording of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube, and accordingly I request that everyone turn off their mobile phones, and I remind you that audio recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted. Councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality, and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So moving to item 1, I declare this meeting open at 6:01 p.m. Agenda items 2, 3, 6, 7, 8.1, 8.2, 9, 11, 13 and 14 will be dealt with at the ordinary council meeting to be held on the 25th of March 2025. Item number 4, attendance. We have an apology from Mayor Greg Milner, and we don't have any approved leave of absence. However, I am aware that Councillor Cridland and Councillor Coveney are both running a little bit late this evening. Item number 5, declarations of interest. Mayor Greg Milner has declared a financial and proximity interest in item 10.3.8 as this application relates to a property that is across the road from a property that is owned or indirectly owned by persons who contributed to his re-election campaign in 2023. This application could also potentially result in a financial gain, loss, benefit or detriment for those persons. And CEO Mike Bradford has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.5.1 as this item relates to his contract of employment. Does anybody else have any interest that they wish to declare? Councillor Prendeville.
Thank you, Presiding Member. I have an impartiality interest in 10.3.4 Collier Park Golf Course, as a family member of mine is a member of the Collier Pines Ladies Golf Club.
Thank you, Councillor Prendeville. And Councillor Choi, did you also have an interest?
Yes, thanks, Mr Presiding Member. 10.1.1, a proposed closure and amalgamation of road reserves near the Collins Street Centre, as landowners or residents near or around Collins Street Centre are or may be known to me. Also the same for 10.1.2, sports spaces investigation / feasibility study to Jonas Mitchell Park, South Perth, for the same reasons. Sorry, both these are impartiality, that landowners or residents near or around that Elm Street, also Jonas Mitchell Park, Elm Street end are or may be known to me. And also for the same reasons, 10.3.1, revocation of local planning policy P350.09, significant views, as again landowners or residents near with significant views are or may be known to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Does anybody else have any interest they wish to declare? Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, my disclosure of interest is to 10.3.1, revocation of local planning policy P350.09, significant views. And the type of interest I have is a proximity interest and also a financial interest. I live in a city location that affords significant views. I am one owner of the property I live in.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Is there any further interest to disclose? Okay, moving on to item 8. We have presentations. Item 8.3 is deputations. And this evening we have 8 presentations of 7 speakers who will each have up to 10 minutes in total to address the council. I would like to first call Ms Cecilia Brooke of South Perth, who is speaking for the officer recommendation at item 10.3.3.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor and councillors. It is noted that agenda item 10.3.3, 40 km/h residential zone speed limit proposal via reference 25555 is currently before council. We speak on behalf of the officer's recommendation, but with consideration to the information which I will address. Crossborough, and we are sure along with many other residents of the city who live in areas mentioned, are delighted that this area for speed is being addressed. Crossborough, along with the South Perth Bicycle Users Group, request that Murray Street from Thelma Street to the Lifestream Church and the radio station be rezoned as a permanent 40 km/h zone. This should also include McNab Loop, which runs from Murray Street, adjacent to the church, around to Como Secondary College. Parents dropping their children off at Como Secondary School often speed around this short road. Members of the Crossborough Committee have been speaking with residents from the Collier Park Retirement Village who have for some years been very concerned about the traffic in this area. The City of South Perth says that main roads are responsible for this decision. This section of the road is widely used by patrons of the church and its daycare centre and the French kindergarten, the Como Secondary College, Penrose College, and multiple sports groups using the car parks between Collier Park Golf Course and Graydon Oval, especially Mondays to Saturdays. Many school students and elderly residents from Collier Park Village and Meath Care Retirement Village, as well as numerous other local recreational walkers cross the road, and cyclists have no bicycle lanes for about half the length of the road. Unfortunately, too many drivers seem to be very impatient and speed along this road despite the 40 km/h school zoning. We request Council consider our amendment to 10.3.3. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Brooke. If you could just wait there for one moment. Councillors, does anybody have any questions for Ms Brooke? No? Thank you. You can take your seat. Okay, now I'd like to call Mr Tim Howling, who is speaking both against the officer recommendation at item 10.3.1 and also against the officer recommendation at item 10.3.5. Mr Howling, can I ask you to speak to both items and limit your presentation to 10 minutes? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for receiving my deputation. I think you'll be grateful to know that I'm speaking on a matter rather than crime tonight. The matter that I want to address you on is the proposed revocation, firstly, of the significant views policy as set out in item 10.3.1. This proposal to revoke a policy in its entirety, in at least my view, is misplaced. The policy ought properly to be amended and changed to give proper guidance to officers so that when they are considering how properly and objectively to determine whether or not a view of significance is being removed is determined according to an objective set of criteria determined by this local government and yourselves as councillors. There are people within the City of South Perth who have paid an absolute premium for sites and locations, and no, I accept under the R codes that they do not have a monopoly on those views. However, the R codes do say that you ought properly to be preserving those views. And you cannot just leave that question to whatever it is that an officer is going to determine. This is a strategic question. How properly to model the views of significance that are to be maintained, and how the individual officers are to properly consider that approach. Now that is precisely the question that was put before the tribunal in some of the cases that are referred to within the report that's been provided to you. So I say that the report provided to you does not provide the full picture. You cannot, as the strategic decision makers of this local government, simply say, we're going to leave it to the individual officers, junior or otherwise, out the back to make a decision about what it is and how it is to be determined whether or not that view of significance is to be reduced. Oh yes, the report says we receive expert evidence in relation to it, but it's how that expert evidence is to be assessed that is all important. Because remember, What is happening through the proposal is that the local government itself, that is yourselves as councillors, are being told that you are no longer able to make decisions on questions of view. But you still can have control over the objective, proper determination by the officers when they come to assess an application, how it is that that application is to be considered. So I say that you ought not to be revoking this policy, but what you ought properly to be doing is amending this policy to provide the guidance to the individual officers so that they know the objective criteria set strategically by this local government, which is directly within the purview of yourselves as councillors to set the direction of the local government. Sadly, I concluded after reading this agenda item that this revocation, which is an amendment made to a policy above all other policies, and there's plenty of policies that require amendment, seems to be a policy revocation done at great speed without any proper reason or basis. What we need is to strengthen the strategic decision making, and I ask that when you go and make a decision about this, that you direct the council officers to amend the policy so that they properly are able to determine, or you as councillors are able to properly determine the objective set of criteria that needs to be applied by the officers when assessing an individual decision. And the officers may be here today, they may be somebody else tomorrow, but you need to give consistency in decision making. I've been asked to keep to 10 minutes and I will endeavour to do so. The second question that I've asked to address the council on, that when reading the agenda gave me a degree of concern, related to the policy on short stay accommodation. Firstly, you are required as a local government to advertise the policy adopted by this council. Why didn't you do it? What you've advertised is not what has been adopted by the council at all. It fails properly to take into account that which had been adopted by the council at its meeting, and it takes out what was adopted and it becomes a key position of the officer, whoever it is who recommended it, because properly considered, the policy which was sent out for advertising and now proposed for amendment and also criticised has set up a strawman. The words "and" with the locational characteristics within 200 metres of the Perth Zoo, within 400 metres of the neighbourhood zone, and it says within 400 metres of the centre zone, that's what you advertised, was not what you adopted at your council meeting at all. The words "or" were included. Now, what gives me concern is that this becomes the linchpin for why the locational characteristics ought to be rejected. So you adopted as a council the words "or", and then within the council officer's report it says further drafting inserted by the council provides "and" between the criteria such that USTRA would need to be within 200 metres of Perth Zoo and 400 metres of the centre zone, precluding the majority of the district. Precluding the majority of the district. That's why the locational characteristics was taken out. But you got it wrong. You didn't advertise that which the council had properly set down for the purposes of advertising. What the council said was "or". The words "or" were repeatedly used, and anybody can look at the council meeting, I think it's October or November, and when you look at the policy itself as advertised, it fails to advertise that which was adopted by this local government. And why is locational characteristics so important? It's so important because all of the criteria set by the state government considered locational characteristics. Whether it was the guidelines, and let me make clear, the guidelines are not a planning policy. Not a planning policy. They're guidelines. Or whether it be the position statement. A position statement is not a planning policy of the WAPC or the Department of Planning and Lands and Heritage. They are position statements, or the background papers adopted by the state government. All of those looked at ensuring that there were locational characteristics, and further, they said what you ought properly to be considering is the provision of access to tourist amenity, proximity to social and cultural and leisure attractions, accessibility to transport routes and public transport services as the criteria that these guidelines were saying to you as the local government that you ought properly to adopt within your policy. So, Madam Deputy Mayor, I say that throwing out the policies in the way that was adopted by this local government without any submitter putting in the position that you ought properly to throw out the locational characteristics is simply a bridge too far. This is a local government where I'm a ratepayer, it's where I've invested, and it's an area where I say that if you allow this type of policy provisions to allow unrestricted locational characteristics so that it's at the discretion of whoever it might be at the back who makes the decision, without considering this important adoption by council, you are encouraging South Perth to become an area filled with Airbnbs, and that is not the area where any of us want to live. We want to live in an area where we know our neighbours, where crime's reduced because we know who's living on the street. We want to know who's the person bringing out the bins opposite. And this, unfortunately, relegates Airbnbs wherever you would wish them to be applied. And so, Madam Deputy Mayor, I say that the policy as being proposed, removing locational characteristics, as a seriously entertained planning proposal as it now is, required to be applied in respect of all of the different applications which are now being considered, falls not only short of the mark, but is not a proper application of what is being applied by this local government. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
My apologies, you have 1 minute remaining.
So in totality, if we set the strategic direction, if we are keen to make sure that the amenity of our local government district is maintained, then we do set what is the expectations of the residents. And amenity was summarised in the case of Tempora in the city of Kalamunda. And it said it is the some expectation of the residents, further refined certainly by the tribunal subsequent. However, it is the some expectation of the residents as set by policies that you adopt. You set the strategic direction for this local government, and I ask that you apply the strategic direction and that you continue to insist on that which had been adopted last year in 2024, for some reason unbeknownst, amended by way of this policy that is now being put and proposed for amendment. I ask that you do not adopt the amendments. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Howling. If you could wait there for 1 moment. Councillors, does anybody have any questions for Mr Howling? Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Mr Howling, in relation to your first deputation, you spoke about strengthening the policy for significant views. Now, I know I'm putting you on the spot, but did you have any suggestions about how the policy may be strengthened?
Yes. Look, if you look at the R codes and you have a look at the different provisions which refer very, very blandly to views of significance, there is no criteria and no guidance given within the R codes themselves. So what you have is an opportunity to further define that which is contained within the R codes, not to override or develop a policy which is inconsistent with the R codes, but rather consistent. It says access to views of significance. Now, what you want to do is, sure, you want to have an expert, that's recognised, that's referred to in the cases which came before the tribunal. But what you want then to be able to direct by way of strategic direction is that when the officers out the back are thinking about access to views of significance, that they have an objective criteria by which to assess that which is put by an expert. You see, the difficulty is this. When experts come to the tribunal or express a view, there's often a view taken, oh, the expert must know. But the reality of it is that unless you have a criteria by which you're able to properly assess how that expert addresses its view, I can tell you I've cross-examined numerous experts, and it's always about the assumptions that they apply. What is the criteria by which they've approached the decision? An expert's view, which just simply says, I don't think this is going to have an impact on views of significance, is worthless and indefensible and will be thrown out. So too, if the local government officers fail to apply...
Mr Howling,
Yes.
sorry, can I ask you to stick to the question? which was, did you have any suggestions as to how we could amend the views of
Sure.
significance policy? Thank you.
So certainly by setting a criteria by the way within which the officers are properly able to consider the question.
Thank you, Mr Howling. Are there any further questions? No? Thank you, Mr Howling.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to call Dr Clifford Rolfe of Busselton, who is speaking against the officer recommendation at item 10.3.6. Is Dr Rolfe in the chamber? No. Okay, we will move on to Mr Warwick Harvey of South Perth, who is speaking for the officer recommendation at item 10.3.6. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for taking this opportunity to let me speak today. I appreciate your time and the responsibility you hold in balancing the needs of residents, businesses and visitors to South Perth. I'm here to request the consideration of my application, the reconsideration of my application 10.3.6 to change my apartment's use from multiple dwelling to unhosted short-term rental. I would like to mainly address issues around my application for the short-term rental and the management plan I've put in place. But at the time, I feel that I need to respond to some points raised by my fellow residents, even if they are historical. My wife and I initially bought the apartment as our first home in 2008, and within 3 years completely renovated it. Soon after completing the renovation, we had our first baby, and at the same time, the current owner of Unit 4 moved in. It wasn't long before complaints began and the new owner stating that our baby cried too much and disturbed her. After these complaints, we soon decided to move out. In early 2013, we moved into our new home and decided to short-term lease our South Perth apartment. This property has been operating successfully for over 13 years, and within this time, I've received approximately 5 complaints from all from just one owner, Unit 4. That is 5 complaints from a total of approximately 1,000 different tenants over this 13-year period, the majority of which are from more than a decade ago, and I used a short-term rental agency to manage my property. In April 2024, the City of South Perth received a complaint from my neighbour regarding the use of my apartment as a short-term rental. This complaint was made just 3 days after I alerted our strata management company about Unit 4's incorrect exclusive use of common property areas. This occurred after 12 years of operating my apartment as a short-term rental without issues. To reiterate, within 3 days of our strata management company requesting that Unit 4 return the fenced-off area to common property, a complaint was lodged with the City on the use of my apartment. This is clearly a retaliatory move. 2 of the other 3 submissions from the complex owners, who are also incorrectly using common property exclusively. The only reason I bring this up is so you all understand some of the background issues with this complex. The common property issue is due to be heard at the State Administrative Tribunal next month. This is not a tight-knit community, as my neighbour's deposition described in October last year. It is a dynamic and diverse group of residents. Out of a total of 13 units, this complex has only 2 owner-occupiers, 4 short-term rentals, none of which have been approved by council, and the remainder are medium to long-term renters that frequently change. Funnily enough, when the City first contacted me to ask if we were using our apartment as a short-term rental, they sent me a link to one of the other apartments that were listed on Airbnb. All 4 neighbour submissions seem to have issues with short-term rentals, yet I was the only one that was reported to the City. One reason that was given was that the short-term renters would delay in contacting owners if an emergency scenario arises. I believe the contrary to be true. Long-term tenants are more likely to be away for a long period, so a broken hose can go unnoticed for several days, not hours, and flood an entire apartment. My short-term rental is professionally managed, carefully maintained and adheres to high standards, ensuring it is a positive asset to the community. A thriving visitor economy supports local businesses, cafes, restaurants, shops and attractions. Short-term rentals like mine bring in guests who actively contribute to the local economy. Unlike hotels, short-term rental guests explore the area, eat at local restaurants and shop at independent businesses. One common concern around a short-term rental is potential disruption. My property prioritises community harmony through strict guest screening and house rules. These rules prohibit parties, excessive noise and any behaviour that can disturb neighbours. My contact number plus 2 additional emergency contact numbers have been provided to all neighbours and tenants as part of the management plan. Claims from my neighbours of guest damage to the common property and my property are all completely unsubstantiated and false. The property is professionally cleaned, regularly inspected and issues are addressed immediately. Since managing it myself from August 2024, there have been 0 complaints. With Airbnb platform, I manage each booking, see each person's profile and reviews, and I'm able to make much better informed decisions than prior to the introduction of the Airbnb platform. If there is an issue with the property, the tenant has the ability to contact me directly. Yes, not an agent, me directly, and I live a short 10-minute drive from the property. Any issues are quickly resolved. My management plan introduces further assurances such as decibel monitoring devices. These devices report noise levels automatically above a certain predefined limit within a notification sent to my mobile when a noise exceedance occurs. That way disruptions can be quickly resolved before upsetting neighbours. The apartment has several unique noise reduction features. The living room and bedrooms are carpeted. The hardwood floors in the kitchen and hallway have heavy-duty acoustic underlays which reduce noise transmission and minimise disturbances to the apartment below. Additionally, the apartment has no common walls, eliminating noise transmission to other properties. This is a standalone building with only 1 apartment above and 1 below. This building is also within 50 metres of the Perth Zoo and directly opposite a Western Power substation. It is a perfect position for a short-term rental property. It is a short 10-metre distance from my allotted car park to the apartment's front door, minimising noise and disturbances in common areas during arrivals and departures. It also features an isolated enclosed outdoor balcony that provides privacy and ensures outdoor activities do not disturb neighbours. South Perth is evolving and tourism plays a significant role. Short-term rentals provide an alternative that meets different needs, including families needing self-contained accommodation, professionals on extended stays preferring a residential setting, and visitors wanting to experience South Perth like a local. Having a mix of accommodation options ensures South Perth remains competitive with other destinations. I am open to working with the council to ensure my short-term rental operates within agreed upon guidelines. Other properties in my complex currently operate as short-term rentals without approval. My application seeks to bring my property into compliance, ensuring transparency and accountability. My apartment was also registered with Demers as part of the short-term rental accommodation register in mid-2024. In closing, my short-term rental is a well-managed, responsibly operated property that aligns with South Perth's goals of economic growth, tourism and community well-being. It supports local businesses, respects the community, offers a needed accommodation option and seeks to operate within council guidelines. When I initially rented this property as a short-term rental in 2013, Airbnb didn't even exist. Since then, applications as Airbnb and stays, etc., have matured into effective property management tools that make tenant screening much more effective, with the introduction of star ratings for customers. Since taking over management of my property, I've been able to pick and choose the highest ranking tenants for my property. It is, of course, in my best interest to continue to do so. I respectfully ask that my application be reconsidered on its real merits and my long history of responsible property management be taken into account. Thank you for your time and reconsideration. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr Harry. Councillors, does anybody have any questions for Mr Harry? Councillor Coveney?
Thank you for your deputation. You noted that you hadn't lived in the property for 13 years. I just wanted to better understand what your difficulty would be in making it a long-term rental property.
the difficulty in making it long term. It's a choice as an owner. I believe I've got a choice whether I could do long term, I could do short term. I think the problem I have is my neighbour. I don't think it would actually resolve any of the issues that I have. I had the issues myself when I lived there, so it wouldn't matter if it was a long term, short term, any term, we'd have issues. So I don't think that's really relevant.
Thank you, Mr Harry. Any further questions, councillors? No. Thank you for your deputation.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Ms Louise Walker of South Perth, who is speaking against the officer recommendation at item 10.3.6. Ms Walker, you have 10 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you for hearing me, Deputy Mayor and councillors. I'd just like to respond to previous presentation. My issues have been ongoing, as you heard last time, since a massive flood in February 2023. I wasn't notified that anything happened. I came home 24 hours later and at 10 o'clock at night realised that my belongings stored in the laundry were saturated from head to foot, water in the bottom of the filing cabinets and in the laundry trough at the bottom. No notification. More recently, there was a window replacement above me. Debris rained down on my courtyard as I was heading out for work. And yes, that was another complaint. So that's probably one of the 5. The first complaint I made about what was going on upstairs it was an Airbnb, was 2012. My son was doing year 12, the WACE exams, and there was a whole lot of noise, full volume, blasting, as of about 12:30 in the morning. And 5:30 I gave up. No, 4:30 I gave up and started cooking. I couldn't sleep. I keep earplugs, and I called the police after that. And they came back with a grin on their face saying, oh yes, they're filming up there. And the filming sounded like something rough going on. Oh yes, they had a pub brawl scene and this obscene chanting, which went on and on and on. Oh yes, they had a rapper, and it sounded like they were filming porn. They were there for a week. They had signed a nice long lease, and I'm glad to hear that the place is now being professionally managed by Mr Harry, who I understand is still working FIFO up north. No? Okay, well, I'm glad to hear it's professionally managed and there won't be any more of that, or the prostitutes that came through and woke up half a dozen of the units, probably a few years after that. That's nice, but my issues at the moment are still ongoing because I had an inspection report done from Monday. This is following the same organisation, following 2 previous, because my ceilings are still blistering and cracking. There was a report last year that said they were dry and drying. Why are they blistering and cracking now? The damage is extending. And the report says that since the flood event, moisture has diminished in the flood-affected areas of the ceiling, but now moisture is appearing in areas of the ceiling that were not previously affected by the flood event. That was 2023. The report says the plumber did not believe that the moisture could be from the burst 2 years ago, as the slab would have dried out. The moisture damage was significant in the hallway around the entry door. There was blistering down to about a metre from the floor below the light switch. That wall was repaired and repainted. It's now dry. And the hall is now dry, but the wet area is still going on. So there's ongoing damage. I don't know what's the cause. I don't know what's being done about it, but I do know that there were suggestions put in the original report that from the inspectors who did the job for the insurance, 2023, they asked for work to be done. Whether it's been done or not, I don't know. That's my particular position on this. I bought that place in 2010 because there was a renovation done by a previous owner for that lady's mother. Diana's mother was moved in there and she was there for some years. There's an accessible bathroom. It's on the ground floor. It's my forever home. And I'm comfortable there. But this ongoing drama with moisture, this is not the first problem. There's previous leaks. Before COVID, there was a replacement of a hot water system. It wasn't the hot water system leaking that was the problem. It was the drainage from that part of the floor that was a problem that related to the renovation work that was done, 2009, whenever it was done. So there was renovation work done upstairs. There's ongoing issues. And yes, place certainly has improved. The calibre of the tenants has improved, but the development was not designed. It was for short stay. It's in a narrow street. We don't have off-street parking. It was requested the Shire Council many years ago by the Council of Owners, but apparently it costs $20,000 per parking space to be able to redevelop and put in extra parking spaces for businesses. We don't have business parking space. We don't even have dedicated space for visitors or for tradesmen. Now, the parking some nights makes Clarence Street very difficult to get through because of the number of cars there that are to do with the short stay in the area. It's not coping with it very well, and the lady next door has mentioned that to me. We have not yet had a discussion in the Council of Owners about a policy, bylaws to do with short stay. Council of Owners at the moment is effectively dysfunctional. The community environment that we were operating in when I first arrived, a number of those owners have left due specifically to short stay and theft and damage. Car door from a short stay unit went into the owner of number 5's, his wife's new Volvo, and it was a good scratch too. He sold. His neighbour, he'd had enough. He lost his leather briefcase, a souvenir from a trip overseas, with his laptop and all his work in it. It's left outside his door, and the only way you could see that, you can't see it from the car park, the only way you could see it is if you were walking up the stairs. It was somebody in the building. We've got security issues with gates in place, yes, and I did fence off my courtyard after somebody was coming in over the wall as I was hanging out my washing. He couldn't see me, but I could see him, and I realised he was after my great-grandfather's antiques. So, yeah, the structure of the place is little pockets of common area sandwiched with common use areas. But our security hasn't really improved because the number of people who've got the access code for the pedestrian gate include Uber drivers and the people who deliver HelloFresh and a whole lot of other things. They just appear. These people have got the code. Anybody can come in and out. It's not really comforting to know that security is still an ongoing issue. We were missing items out of the garden. Somebody in the area was raiding our gardens before the security fences went up. And then after the security fences went up, a section of retic was removed. Obviously, they got the code or they piggybacked, tailgated when the gates were opening and shutting. I think it was actually a statement. This was last summer, and plants were dying in that area. We couldn't work out why. The retic wasn't actually there. It had been removed. So we've got security issues, we've got parking issues, we've got strata issues in that this has not been discussed. We don't have bylaws and we haven't got a policy. The Airbnb policy doesn't help with emergency work. There is no emergency number to sort out security issues, for example. The carports are small and I have real problems with large vehicles parking next to me. I can't get my car doors open. And there have been occasions where I've had to park elsewhere. the carports are not built for the larger work vehicles. The noise that it's experienced,
Ms Walker, you have 1 minute remaining.
thank you, noise from late night arrivals, kids, they're not all happy. There are ongoing issues that relate to all of the short stay in that development, but specifically, I've got problems with ongoing water damage, and I need to sort that out. Enough's enough. Yes, there's no black mould, but it's not healthy to be living with damp concrete year after year after year, and I'd like to be able to paint those ceilings and put some work into my flat, but I can't do that whilst there's ongoing damage. And there have been instructions of how to fix it. I'd like to see it fixed. Thank you for hearing me out. I hope this all pans out and I can get on with my life without having to fight.
Thank you, Ms Walker. If you could
Thank
wait there
you.
for 1 moment, please. Just wait for 1 moment. Councillors, Councillor Coveney, do you have a question?
Several, thank you, Deputy Mayor. The first was, sorry, thank you for your deputation. You'd mentioned there was a flood in 2023 and you didn't find out for 24 hours. Did you have a phone number that you could call of the owner? And if so, did you call it? And if you didn't have a number, now that you've got a number, do you think that would fix that problem happening again?
Finding the flood after the fact doesn't really help. I have actually provided my number to the owner of the unit upstairs and asked him to call me if there was anything else that happened that I needed to be aware of. The window replacement I talked about was only not that long ago. It was about 4 weeks ago. I can't remember the date exactly. He had my phone number. I provided it last year, but he didn't tell me the work was being done. And as I was on my way out to work, I realised that there was this patter of debris coming down from the unit above. And he could have called me to tell me that it was happening. He could have called me to tell me that the hot water service was being replaced September last year, which was when I gave him the phone number. He had contacted Strata. Strata could have called me. They failed.
Sorry, can I just interject? I don't know that I put my question properly, maybe. My understanding is this is an application for a short stay application, and you're concerned about the fact that your apartment was flooded in 2023 with other issues, and you didn't get notice for 24 hours.
I didn't get any notice at all. I had to call the next day. There was no notice given at all.
Sure. So,
I got home on the Sunday night and I called the next day.
Ms Walker,
please
if you
finish my
just
question?
wait for the question.
what I'm trying to understand is, I understand that the owner, if he's approved, needs to provide his mobile number that someone can call if there's an issue. So I would presume that if that number was called by you or the Airbnb people, that they could have then told you or fixed the issue pretty quickly. So what I'm trying to understand is, when that happened in 2023, did you have the owner's number and did you call it, or did you not have his number?
I didn't have his number.
Right, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms Walker. Councillors, are there any further questions? Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. You'd also mentioned that people in your complex were leaving because of the number of short stays in your complex. Is that because they've told you that, or is that your assumption? I just want to understand where
I've
you got
been
that in.
talking to these people who were co-members of the Council of Owners, and so it's not an assumption. The guy who lost the briefcase was absolutely appalled. The guy who had his car scratched was absolutely appalled, and he sold. And there's another one who's sold as well, just recently. It hasn't settled yet, so it's not registered as a sale until it's settled, and that will be in the next week or 10 days. That's 3.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Walker. Councillors, Councillor Cridland.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Member. Now, Ms Walker, I've had a look at the submissions from number 3, yourself at number 4, and number 7 and number 13. And I don't know if they've been retyped by the city staff, but if they haven't, they are all almost identical. The same title, same font, same spacing, same no signature. Were these all prepared by one person, or?
If they're all the same, I sent my submission out to the others and said, look, this is what I'm submitting, just so you know what I'm sending. If they copied and pasted, that's their decision. I didn't send them from my machine, but I did send out mine to the others earlier, so they knew what I was doing and what my issues were, so they could elaborate or do whatever they want.
And the other question I had is the presentation from the owner and the applicant for the short term said that you'd made a complaint, I think, and that it was made 4 days after there had been, as I understood it, some action taken to have you remove some fencing over joint property or common property for all the unit holders, and that your complaint was simply retaliation against him. Do you have any comment about that?
Yes, the SAT application was against myself only, not all the unit holders. There are three other unit holders who have common land which they're using for various reasons in the development. There has been an amalgamation of common areas and to exclusive use areas. Previously, the strata plan dates from 1974. Those amalgamations were done in 1997. And the reason why those amalgamations were done is because through the development, the design features of the time in the 70s, there were little pockets of common area interspersed with private use areas. Now, the fence that was required in the SAT application against myself, that he wanted that removed and a low wall put there, well, that was the boundary where I had somebody coming over the fence. He had his hands on the fence and he was coming over. It took me a couple of days to work out what he was after, because he'd gone up and down Clarence Street and he was bobbing, and I could see him through the fence, through the hedge. I was hanging washing. He couldn't actually see me. And he was doing this little dance, and I thought, what's that person doing? Just caught it in my peripheral vision. Then when he appeared over the wall, I was shocked. And it took me a couple of days to get over that shock, to actually retrace the steps and find out what he was after. So that's the reason why I asked Council of Owners for approval to put up that boundary fence, and it didn't work because there was a side on the entry driveway side, which I had put stuff up, held with zip ties, because I wasn't in a position to spend some more money on a fence, and I was still missing stuff that was being stolen, and there was stuff being broken. So I
Sorry, Ms. Walker.
turned it around. So yes, I was the subject of a request to remove my security, which had been approved by the Council of Owners, not gone through to an AGM, but it was to link two private areas, and that security has since been extended to two security gates on the driveways, the entry and the exit, the same security fencing, because we've had ongoing issues. Audi was jemmied, we've had petrol siphoned,
Okay,
I've
Ms.
had my
Walker,
windows broken
sorry,
twice.
I'm going to stop you there. Thank you. Councillors, are there any? Councillor Cridland, one further question?
Yes. Well, two, hopefully. It sounds like almost like there's a civil war going on in this particular strata between the owners.
Well, having the notification that I needed to remove that front fence, I think it was May last year, it was out of context. I didn't realise that there was actually a full application for me to remove my security fencing, which had allowed me to keep my washing safe, and had been approved by the Council of Owners. I didn't realise that
Sorry, once more. Sorry, if I could just try and ask both Councillor Cridland and Ms. Walker, if you could please try and keep your questions and answers narrowed to the application. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Member.
SAT application post-dates the flood in
you could just-
2023.
Yes, okay.
One moment.
And it's a
Ms. Walker, please
retaliation.
stop. Councillor Cridland, if you could please ask your second question. Thank you. And Ms Walker, if you could please keep the answer confined to the question. Thank you.
That's right. If you could please just address your mind to the question that I'm going to ask. Now, you've complained about this person who's put in an application for approval to render consistent with the relevant rules his use of this property's short-term stay. What problem do you have with the others? Do you expect the city to take action against them to stop them using their properties as short-term stays, or is it okay?
Well, there's an application from Unit 1, 5 Clarence Street.
Yeah, well, and my question is, do you expect the council to take action against them to prevent them using their properties as short-term stays as well, or is it only Unit 4 that you have a problem with?
I didn't understand there was going to be action taken. I just understood that it was either approved or denied, and I would probably put in I have put a submission in with my objections to Unit 1 as well, because of the reasons that I've outlined in my previous submission. And
Thank you, Ms Walker. I think the question is getting a little bit broad now. I understand Councillor Coveney has one further question.
I was just trying to provide, I think, clarification to Councillor Cridland's question, so we might get an answer. The applicant, I think, had said there are at least four other short stay accommodations in the complex. I think what Councillor Cridland is trying to ascertain, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is do you have an issue with all 4 Airbnbs or just this Airbnb?
just this Airbnb. The owner of number 10 is exemplary. He shows up, he does stuff, he is involved in the council, he makes decisions, he participates and communicates.
Thank you, Ms Walker.
Yeah.
Councillor De Souza, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Ms Walker. Just a quick question specifically about noise. Mr Harry described a range of work he's done to, I guess, mitigate issues such as the noise sensors which go to his phone. Do you think, if not in the past, at least going forward, this will address some of your concerns about noise?
If that's adhered to, then obviously it will. Obviously, yeah. But, yeah, it's in the lap of the gods.
Thank you, Ms Walker. Councillor, is there any further questions? No. Thank you, Ms Walker, for your deputation. I would now like to invite Mr Richard Newman from Carers WA of Perth, who is speaking for the officer recommendation at item 10.3.8. Thank you, Mr Newman. You have 10 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Chair. Thank you, councillors, for this opportunity. So just a little bit about us. Carers WA is a not-for-profit community-based organisation and a registered charity. We support family members who provide unpaid care and support to a loved one or a family member who may have a disability, a chronic or terminal illness, a mental health concern, a drug and alcohol or addiction, or who is frail due to age. Can I start off by acknowledging some of the submissions opposing this, and just want to highlight the fact that the opposing submissions do raise the safety and the welfare of people in the building, and I'd just like to acknowledge that and say it's glad that everyone's putting the safety of everybody's as their main concern. So thank you. In 2007, this unit was gifted to Carers WA by the late Anne Bluntish. The property has been operating in the capacity as a respite facility in that time. That's 17 years. Respite means that a carer is given 2 to 3 days break away from their caring role. Over 50% of carers provide over 100 hours of care a week. We only work 40 hours a week and we go home tired. Carers don't get that break. Carers are tired, burnt out and stressed. Caring is unpaid. All they seek is quiet and recuperation. In 2022, I returned to the organisation after 15 years into the role of CEO. In 2024, as part of my due diligence, I undertook a review of all our properties and discovered that this property was not listed on the local planning scheme as operating as a respite facility. We self-reported this to council and sought to immediately rectify this issue. I wrote to the Council of Owners, stating that out of concern and respect for this process, we would suspend taking any new bookings on this property while the matter is still before the council. We do not receive any income from this property, nor is it operated as a short-term accommodation capacity. It is not a commercial venture, and it does not appear on any website advertising accommodation. Any and all costs associated with this facility and upkeep, the strata rates, the utilities, are covered by us from donations and retained earnings. The city notified us that the process of change of registration of the land use, and we were informed that it was going to be moved from a residential to short-term accommodation. We duly registered and embarked upon the process, expressing that this was not a short-term accommodation venture. In December 2002, we were notified that our application was actually incorrect after being informed this was the process we needed to take, and we needed to deregister from this process and re-register as a change of use not listed, carer respite. We then followed the registration and public notice period required. It is from this public notice that we understand there have been 11 submissions opposing this application, 7 of which only come from the building itself, and none of them have been signed. In the 18 years, it's important to note that the service provider here is not changing in the centre and has been ongoing since 2007. That's almost 18 years. Only the registration of the land use is changing. In 18 years of operation, there have been no reported or recorded incidents or formalised complaints. There has not been any recorded or reported incidents, security breaches or antisocial behaviour. There has been no medical emergency or the calling of enforcement officers. There has been one letter in 6,200 days. And that letter refers to somebody who cheekily plugged in their mobility scooter in the foyer, and somebody was seen shuffling within the reception area. Unit 35 is governed by the size and the number of the bedrooms, which is 2. There will and cannot be any more people utilising the property that there has been in the past, and this means there will not be an increase in either street traffic, foot traffic, and there will be no increase in the building wear and tear. Every carer who utilises Unit 35 is vetted and registered by our organisation. Clear safety and emergency instructions are provided prior to and during the carer's stay. They have been developed and audited by safety specialist organisations. Everyone's safety is important, and as good corporate citizens, we invested and developed our own. The age of the people utilising Unit 35 has raised concerns. I can confirm you that over the past 12 months, the average age of the person utilising the property has been 50 years old. To address this concern of the respondents who potentially seek to reduce or refuse access to buildings to any person or persons who may have reduced mobility is actually opposition to state, federal and international laws which regarding the rights of persons living with a disability. It also contravenes the city's own Access and Inclusion Plan 2022 to 2027, and our response to this concern is that it would be discriminatory that any person's ability and or cognitive state would allow them or disallow them access into a building. We are aware that the building is a Class 2 building and has certain building requirements associated with it. We hold a number of public liability and special insurances to make sure that the safety and well-being of the residents in the building and people who use that building are covered. We commenced the registration of this land process in April 2022. Since then, we have had dealings with the council and the Council of Owners and also owners of the property. Even though we don't always get a copy of the minutes from the Council of Owners or the Strata Council meetings, I can confirm that at an extraordinary general meeting held on the 23rd of July 2024, no item regarding Unit 35 was on the agenda or appeared in the minutes. I can confirm that I attended the AGM on the 16th of December 2024, and the only query on the Unit 35 was the agenda on the agenda and appeared in the minutes that people were asking us the status of our application. A Strata Council meeting on the 19th of December 2024, no item regarding Unit 35 was on the agenda or appeared in the minutes. At a special Strata Council meeting on the 22nd of January 2025, no item regarding Unit 35 was on the agenda or appeared in the minutes. At a council meeting on the 30th of January 2025, no item regarding Unit 35 also appeared on the agenda or the minutes. So this is the Council of Owners and the Strata Council. We have received 11 submissions regarding our applications, 7 of which are from the building. All but 2 of these submissions are from units on floors above our unit. So therefore, they will be largely unknown who comes and who goes from the building. If there is a concern regarding unit ownership belonging to an organisation or a company, I can confirm that Unit 28 is owned by Quasic Limited, Unit 39 is owned by Purton Limited, Unit 41 is owned by Bailey & Co Pty Limited, Unit 54 is owned by Impos Pty Limited, and Unit 55 is owned by Giorgio Super Pty Limited, and Unit 57 is owned by Chin Nominees. The comments made in the submissions alluding to respite provided by Carers WA merely being a guise for short-term accommodation is disappointing and simply not true. We are a good corporate citizen and we work with the Council of Owners and the Strata Council and will continue to do so. They have our numbers, they have our contact details, and we have had one letter in 6,200
Mr Newman, you have 1 minute
days.
remaining. Thank you.
That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could wait there for 1 moment. Councillor Prendeville, you have a question.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Member. Thank you so much for your deputation tonight. I just had a query. I know there were some submissions that talked about safety and all these sorts of things and how the building might not be up to code, etc. And there was comment around signage and mapping and that sort of thing that might be added. Is that your responsibility and is that part of your plan going forward?
So we actually do that.
Yeah.
For anyone who comes in and collects the keys and registers for the service, we provide a safety briefing for them, and it's also available in the unit as well, and the building has their own safety regulations, which I believe that are provided behind the door of every unit, but I can't check every unit on the site.
So as far as you're aware, there's nothing lacking in terms of...
No, they've been audited by safety specialists
Yeah.
to meet current requirements, and we hold special insurances and other insurances to maintain the safety of people in the building and the organisation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any further questions? Councillor Cridland.
Thank you for your presentation. I must admit, if you were going to be my neighbour, I'd be quite happy. Certainly you don't sound like the scariest mob to move in. Just towards the end of your presentation, just before you said, oh, well, that's all I've got to say, you said, in 16 years we've received 1 letter.
Correct.
What was that about?
It was about someone parking their mobility scooter in the foyer and had plugged it in, and there was concern that perhaps we were using Strata power and that it wasn't the correct place for the mobility scooter to be parked, and a person who appeared to be infirmed or aged was seen shuffling in the foyer area and had used the wrong entry and exit door.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any further questions? No. Thank you, Mr Newman.
Thank you
may
very
take
much.
your seat. And the final deputy for the evening is Mr Murray Fisher of South Perth, who is speaking against the officer recommendation at item 10.3.8. Thank you, Mr Fisher. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to raise our concerns regarding the officer's recommendation. If I can give you just a brief history, our building at 87 South Perth Esplanade was constructed in 1970. Well, it was approved by the council, the city councils in 1970 as a Class 2 sole occupancy building. The BCA Class 2 building certification assumes that Class 2 buildings will not be used as a place of short-term or transient living, but that they will be used as permanent dwellings, consistent with a Class 1A building use. However, the BCA offers concessions to Class 2 buildings in recognition that the occupants are long-term and therefore are likely to be familiar with the building and likely to have different expectations in certain areas. These concessions include at Esplanade Court, which is now a 55-year-old building, that the building does not have a fire sprinkler system. We do not have a fire alarm or fire monitoring system. We do not have our fire escape stairwells pressurised for smoke. We do not have a centralised smoke detection system. We do not have illuminated exit signs. We do not have emergency lighting other than in the stairwell. Our lifts are small and do not comply with requirements for stretcher or disability wheelchair access. We have no access or facilities for people with disabilities. Safety issues. Under item 1G of the officer's report, under comments, it states the applicant has advised that additional signage and mapping provided to ensure means of property access and egress is clear. The applicant appears to be unaware that an owner has no power to fix signage to common property of a strata company. The owners certainly do not want our building turned into a motel. In the case of this application, we have a proposal by the applicant for up to 3 transient tenants renting the 2-bedroom unit for up to 3 days at a time. In essence, around 10 new unfamiliar transient people per week. Many of these carers and their guests are infirm and disabled. They are entering into an unfamiliar multi-storey 55-year-old Class 2 sole occupancy 9-storey unit. Many would not be able to access the stairwell in the event of a fire or emergency or a lift failure or even a power failure. This could equate to over 300 transient, unfamiliar tenants per year occupying this 2-bedroom unit. Surely this is an accident waiting to happen. The owners of Esplanade Court have had continual problems with Carers WA and have expressed their concerns in writing regarding the safety issues, including their tenants being lost in the building and leaving their mobility gophers in the common property foyer and even rearranging foyer furniture. I have personally reported to Carers WA that on the 20th of May last year, a couple had become lost on the ground floor and the gentleman was shuffling on a walking frame and looked very infirm and certainly could not have accessed the stairs in the event of emergency or a power failure. It is a great surprise to me that Carers WA have made this application in full knowledge of the problems being experienced with their transient tenants and the safety concerns already raised with them at a meeting last year on the 3rd of May at their premises by the chairman of our strata company. This application is in fact an application for an unlisted use in a 55-year-old Class 2 sole occupancy residential building, unsuitable and not fit for purpose, and it is an application outside of the government's vision and jurisdiction for unhosted short-term rental accommodation, which would restrict the applicant under those terms which was originally applied for last year to only 90 days in any 365 days. What is now applied for is for up to 300 unfamiliar tenants to occupy this unsuitable building per year. Car parking. Lot 34, Unit 35, has only one allocated car bay for its tenant. The applicant before the council is for up to 3 people at a time. It is highly likely that 3 people will not all arrive in one car, and there is no allocated parking for a second car. In the past, there have been parking issues with this unit, multiple parking issues. Liability. I believe from my observations in regards to these activities, and I have been in the building for over 20 years, that this application, if approved, is an accident waiting to happen, and that the building is unsuitable and unsafe for the proposed activities of these transient 3 days tenants. And even if I refer to the carers application before you and their management program, under 4 accessibilities, it states, and it's self-evident, due to the age of the building, disability access is limited. There is wheelchair access available via a small lift in the apartment complex. However, this may not suit larger wheelchairs. Within the apartment itself, a wheelchair may not fit through the hallway to access the toilet and bedrooms. The shower has a tiled step over. There are no grab rails in the shower, toilet or bath. Mobility scooters should not be left unattended in the foyer area. And this is a problem we've had with all these mobility scooters being left in our main foyer. If approved, this application, if approved, is an accident waiting to happen, and that the building is unsuitable and unsafe for the proposed activities of these transient 3 days tenants, and certainly does not meet the BCA code requirements for such activity. In the event of a fire or other emergency, and there is a serious injury or fatality, where does the City of South Perth's responsibility lie as to liability should they have approved this application with full knowledge of the building's limitation and the potential for over 300 transient, many infirm or disabled tenants per year? It's time for common sense to prevail. I believe that we all have a responsibility and a duty of care for the personal safety
Mr Fisher,
of
sorry, you
these
have 1 minute
transient
remaining.
carers, for the transient carers themselves, and this application should not be approved in their interests alone. I thank the Council for their attention and their service to the ratepayers of South Perth.
Thank you, Mr Fisher. Councillors, does anybody have any questions for Mr Fisher? Councillor Coveney?
Thank you for your deputation, Mr Fisher. You mentioned that you didn't want your complex turned into a motel. Can you just explain that comment to me in the context of the units being used for that same purpose for the last 16 years?
I'm sorry, I've got a bit of a hearing.
Sorry. You'd mentioned that you didn't want your complex turned into a motel. And what I understood from the applicant is they've been using the units for the purpose they're applying for now for the last 16 years. So can you explain your comment that you don't want it turned into a motel if it appears to have already been being used for that purpose?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said.
Mr Fisher, Councillor Coveney is saying that the unit complex or the particular apartment that's being applied for has been used for this purpose for 18 years. So he's questioning your comment as to turning the complex into a motel.
There have been continuing problems for the 18 years. And it reached a head last year where we asked for a meeting with carers, and the chairman attended, and I think as a result of this, they realised they were not operating within the bounds of the zoning, and they have now applied for this approval.
Thank you. Councillor, is there any further questions?
Which, in my opinion, would require a Class 1A building.
Councillor Navarre, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Look, I was just wondering, you're obviously very concerned about the folk who come on a short stay, but I was wondering also about whether that concern extends to the older residents in the building, and how would they differ from the visitors?
A very good question. As per the code, the Class 2A building is zoned on the basis that people are familiar with the building and are permanent residents. A Class 2 building is not suitable for transient people who do not understand the building, don't know where the fire escapes are, etc., etc.
Thank you, Mr Fisher. Councillor, is there any further questions of Mr Fisher? No. Okay. Thank you for your deputation, Mr Fisher. Okay, that concludes the public deputation time, and I'll now move on to item number 10, being the draft reports. And I'll hand you over to our Chief Executive Officer, Mr Mike Bradford, to take you through the balance of the March reports.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. Item 10.1.1, proposed closure and amalgamation of road reserves near the Collins Street Centre. This report seeks a council resolution to approve the permanent closure of 4 road reserves that are not functioning as road and the subsequent amalgamation of unallocated Crown land with the city's adjoining freehold land in accordance with Section 58 and Section 87 of the Land Administration Act 1997 and Regulation 9 of the Land Administration Regulations 1998.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions? Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor, and I do have a few questions that I provided on notice to the City Administration. The first one is just following some community feedback since the agenda went out and for transparency purposes. Is the City able to please simplify the intent and rationale of the proposed closure and amalgamation of land?
Thank you. Director Adams.
Yeah, so the intent and rationale of the closure is initially to ensure that the tenure aligns with the land use, as we already know that these parcels will never be used as roads. So subsequent to the determination by the state as to whether the city can acquire the land, the city will undertake further investigations as to the potential uses for the land and present options to council. So the intended outcome is for the land to provide the greatest possible benefit to the community, whether that be social, environmental, economic or financial.
Thank you, Director Adams. And Councillor Choi for the question.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor and to Director Adams. So my next question is in regards to road reserves C and D. On the agenda at pages 12 and 14, it discusses potential future income, revenue and employment opportunities that may be present with these parcels of land if they are closed and amalgamated. I'm just wondering what type of land optimisation opportunities does the city think it could exist with these sites if amalgamated, as proposed to form one large land parcel, and who would that most benefit?
Thank you, Director Adams.
So the intention is that once the land tenure is determined, the city will be able to work out what potential opportunities are for the land. As we all know, the current facilities are ageing and will require replacement in the near future. So sorting out the land tenure is crucial to any decisions going forward. The city will look at all options and determine, as I said in my previous response, what provides the greatest overall benefit to the community, taking into account the social, environmental, economic and financial outcomes. And I guess the point to remember is how this project progresses and for what purpose it will ultimately be used for is a decision by council ultimately anyway.
Thank you, Director Adams. Councillor Choi, one more question.
A couple more, thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. And again, thanks to Director Adams. There is currently some public open space and recreational infrastructure in situ around the Collins Street Centre. And could this potentially be at risk if the various land parcels are amalgamated and optimisation opportunities are sought, which, as you've said, also include economic? And how would, if that was the case, how would the public open space in this area be protected for the community and future generations?
Thank you, Director Adams.
So again, the road reserves currently being used as public open space will continue to be used as public open space unless council decides otherwise. It should also be noted that the city does not currently have total control over the land designated as road reserve. However, once amalgamated with the city's land, the city would have total control over how this land is utilised. So council would be able to determine exactly what they wanted to do and how that land was used in the future. So, and just to be clear, any other areas of POS within the vicinity would not be affected by any decisions regarding these land parcels.
Thank you, Director Adams. Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and to Director Adams. So it appears from the comments made on page 15 of the agenda that the state government would expect payment from the city and hence ratepayers for the Crown land proposed to be acquired. And does the city have any idea at the present time in what region this amount could be, and also where would the funds come from for such payment?
Thank you, Director Adams.
So as part of the process, the state would provide a valuation of the land and the city would make a decision as to whether to acquire it based on that valuation. We currently don't know the value because it actually needs to go through a valuation process and be valued as it's currently being used. However, once the value is known, council will be asked to make a decision on whether to purchase it and then where the funds could come from. Obviously, we have money sitting in reserves, which is used for acquiring assets for the benefit of the ratepayers. And so, it's more than likely that any funds would come out of one of the city's reserves.
Thank you, Director Adams. Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So just taking on board some of those responses, thanks again to Director Adams, I'm looking at paragraph 3 of the officer recommendation where it's seeking council to authorise the closures and amalgamation if there are no submissions received during the public consultation period. I'm just wondering, without sort of this information around financial contributions and probably some other matters, and that's not going to be included in any sort of public consultation document, how is it able to, I'm just trying to understand the process, how is the city able to go straight to signing off on something when we sort of don't have all this information, and some of that information which the community might be interested in knowing, such as the value and where the funds are coming from, they potentially might want that in that public consultation document. I'm just trying to understand paragraph 3.
Sorry.
Thank you, Director Adams.
So we're requesting council to allow the city to initiate the process. And obviously, part of the process is advertising the closures, and if there's submissions, they need to be brought back to council for consideration anyway. That's part of the process. And then obviously, if there's a willingness of council to go forward with the process, then when we get to the point of needing to pay for it, council needs to approve the funds. So there's a couple of steps in there that involve council making decisions.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Navard, I know you've been waiting patiently.
I've just got 2 questions left. Why is the road reserve between Broome and Shaftesbury Street at Arlington Avenue T Junction wider than the existing road allocation on Arlington Avenue? And would this relate to the land's topography at this location? And could there be any particular challenges that might need to be overcome at this location if an amalgamation of the lands was to occur?
Thank you, Director Adams.
So the subject road reserve that you're referring to is 24.38 metres wide and was created on a plan of the subdivision of those properties, of those surrounding properties, with reference to the plan on which they exist, Plan 576. The road reserve was historically 2 lots, with each being 12.19 metres wide. That became named and published as a public road on the state's Government Gazette in 1942. However, it was never constructed upon and never used as a road.
Thank you, Director Adams. Councillor Navard.
I was just wondering about, I do recall that the purchase of public land seemed to have increased in price in more recent times, and I was therefore wondering about how those costs might stack against a normal commercial purchase.
Thank you, Director Adams.
So I think the most recent purchase I can refer to is the purchase the city made of the land on Manning Road where the old library sits, which was reserve land and Crown land, and the city purchased that for 4,000 square metres of land for $400,000. So if you compare that to what a commercial piece of land would be in the same location, I think you get an idea of, you know, the different valuations and how it's so much dependent on the permitted use for that piece of land. You know, I'm not expecting that we'd be charged commercial rates for what is essentially unused and unallocated Crown land.
Thank you, Director Adams. Councillor Prendeville, and then I'll go to Councillor De Souza.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just a question. The Collins Street Centre buildings obviously being used by the community in different ways. Just this question around the continued use of that centre, obviously through this entire process, and the approximate life left of that building itself, if we know.
Thank you, Director Adams.
So we have done an analysis of who uses that particular building to prepare for when it is no longer usable by those particular people if we don't either do some significant works to it to upgrade the building so that it is usable for a long period of time, or replace it in its entirety. We have done some condition assessments recently of our buildings, and we do have some figures on what that building, what is required over the next, I think it's 10 years, on that building. I haven't got them to hand, but I can certainly provide them to you. I think they were provided as part of a briefing to councillors some time ago, but I'll dig those up and I can provide them to you.
Thank you, Director Adams. Councillor De Souza.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. So to confirm, in terms of the valuation process, we would, as the city, would effectively pay the consideration, which is the value as of now being a road reserve, but eventually have the worth of that sitting as freehold?
So DPLH would instruct the valuer, and or the city's not instructing the valuer on how to value it, but I would not anticipate that they would do anything other than value it at its what it's actually usable for at its present at the present time.
Thank you, Director Adams. No more questions? One more, Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The 4 lots that are intended for closure and amalgamation amount to just over 3,000 square metres. With regard to the public open space that we currently have, I understand we've got a bit of a shortfall with regard to what would be a desirable level of public open space. How would that roughly 3,000 or just over 3,000 square metres contribute towards the public open space? Do we have any indications at all?
I have to take that one on notice.
Thank you. And one further question, Brenda Brandis.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I've got a couple more questions. So with regard to our levels of public open space, but specifically with regard to that area of the Mill Point ward, I'm sort of quite aware that there is a lack of public open space. So would it be the city's intention or proposal to have this set aside as public open space specifically for that area, which is actually deprived of open space?
Director Adams.
So at least 2 of those lots are at least adjoined to significant areas of public open space at the moment, and there's no intention that they're used for anything other than public open space. It's just at the moment we have public open space on a road reserve. So one of the things that I guess we need to do as a local government, and probably all local governments need to do it, is to fix land tenure where we know that it needs to be fixed. And the initial, what we're proposing here, isn't to do anything other than fix the land tenure by acquiring the land and not having it sitting at road reserve, and it continuing to be used how it is currently used.
Thank you, Director Adams. No further questions? Okay. Mr Bradford, if you'd like to continue.
Madam Deputy Mayor. Item 10.1.2, Sports Spaces Investigation Feasibility Study, Sir James Mitchell Park, South Perth, Elm Street End. This report presents the outcomes of the geotechnical investigation into the use and development of a portion of Sir James Mitchell Park, Elm Street End for shared sports spaces.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions relating to this item? Councillor Choi?
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor, and just one. Does the city think that development of this land for sports spaces, as contemplated in the South Perth Foreshore Management and Action Plan 2015, could ever realistically be undertaken? As I believe this is at least the second time this type of exercise at some cost has been undertaken in over a number of years. and perhaps the plan itself needs to be reviewed.
Thank you. Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So the plan itself contemplates an investigation, not that the site itself would actually be developed for sports spaces. So the city has carried out that investigation. In terms of whether it considers it could ever be reasonably developed for that purpose, the site could be earthworked and engineered to provide for sports spaces. It's just a comparison about what the cost of those works would be compared to delivery of other community infrastructure. And as you can see within the report, we've formed the view that at this point in time, it would be more appropriate to prioritise the delivery of George Burnett Leisure Centre or Park redevelopment and the Challenger Reserve Master Plan.
Thank you, Director Adams. Councillor Cridland.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Member. Having read the report, I note that there's reference to the requirement for excavation to, I think, 2 metres for sports playing fields and 2.4, I think it was, for buildings. So 2 questions. One is, if you were to dig down 2 metres, wouldn't you be about 1.5 metres into the water table? That's the first question. And the second question is, noting that this area had historically been used for sports spaces and, you know, for example, polo fields and matches and horse racing, is it the case that now our requirements or standards for playing fields is a lot higher than it was historically when it was used for those purposes?
Thank you, Mr. Bradford.
I'll have a go. I think the short answer to the first question is yes, which is why we're not suggesting we do that, because of the risk associated with meeting that advised approach to making it suitable for playing spaces. There could be other engineering solutions to that, but we think that they would still be risky. In terms of the second part, I suspect that we are applying a standard for what you would use to implement playing sports spaces in a way that they can be sustained and managed in the long term. I suspect in the past that the use of that area for whatever it's been used for has been on a more ad hoc basis without consideration of the maintenance and the sustainment of it. So we are applying the standards that you would need to consider. I can't answer for the past, but I suspect it's open space, let's just use it, is how it was approached. And the difficulty we would have with that is, I can feel Mr. Colgan's glaring at me, is trying to maintain it when it's soggy and wet. Makes it very hard for the parks maintainers and things like that.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Councillor Brenda Brandis, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Maybe the administration won't have the answer now, but just for clarification purposes, I thought that the area that was used for horses many years ago, horse races, was actually where the buildings are actually now, so where there's actually current building structures, and not down on that piece of land directly next to the Swan River at Elm Street. Would anyone be able to provide a clarification on that?
I think I'll take a punt and speak on behalf of all of my colleagues. I don't think we know. If you want us to find out, we can have a look, but I'm not sure that it's relevant.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Bradford. Yeah, I would actually like to know, just given the fact that, you know, obviously it's going to be quite an onerous task, and if we had used it before for playing fields or for horses, and if it was that exact location, then what is so different now? But leading on to another question, wasn't that the exact location that was actually infill rubbish tip as well?
Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So just in response to the location of the buildings, it's standard practice now that the proximity of the buildings would need to be in close proximity to the area for the sports spaces themselves. And that area has been identified as part of the geotech investigation as having P-class soil. So it would require remediation around the location that a building would be located. So irrespective of where a previous building was located, the area that's identified on the plan on page 20, we would need the buildings in close proximity to that space. In terms of the contamination, the city hasn't undertaken an investigation to see whether the site is contaminated. We are aware that various locations along the Swan River were used as former rubbish tips in the past, and one of the recommendations as part of the geotech investigation was that if the city was to proceed with that, we would do various additional investigations such as acid sulphate soils assessments to determine if there's any contaminated material within the site.
Thank you, Director Shaw. Councillor Brenda Brandis, a further question?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you very much, Director Shaw. So just a follow-up question from some of the comments you made about the additional testing and works that would be required. Are they included in that estimate of $20,466,000?
Thank you, Director Shaw.
I'd have to take that one on notice and check the estimate. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cridland, do you have a question?
No, I don't, but I just thought I'd try and help the staff. In responding to Councillor Brenda Brandis's question, I got my information from my memory from a presentation that I saw of the city's historian when we had one as to the use of this particular area in polo and in the city. So maybe if we've still got that presentation, it'll be in that.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Any further questions? No. Thank you, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. Item 10.3.1, a revocation of local planning policy P350.09, significant views. This report proposes the revocation of local planning policy P350.09, significant views for various reasons, including modification to information requirements since the policy was initially adopted by the Council and guidance from recent State Administrative Tribunal decisions on the issue.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions? Councillor Navard? Oh, my apologies. Yes, you declared a proximity interest. We'll pause while you leave the chamber. Thank you, Councillor Navard. Thank you. Okay. Councillor Choi, you have a question?
I have a few, so if Councillor Prindiville would like to go.
You might probably answer mine.
Okay. So a few things. First of all, just starting with the deputation that we heard this evening, I always like to find out what the city officers think about some of the comments that are made from these deputations, and if they, if they'd like to comment on anything that was made in regards to criteria in the R codes, which could maybe be covered in this policy if it was so amended, and anything else that the city might want to comment on.
That's a very broad question. Director Shaw, is that something that you're able to comment on?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Only to say that under the R codes, the design criteria does mention views of significance. That is contained there. In terms of how the officers would actually go about the assessment, the test that's considered as part of Warden versus Town of Mosman Park is what is the existing access to views of significance unaffected by the proposed development? Is it appropriate that access to views of significance be maintained in the circumstances of the case? And if so, does the proposed development maintain access to views of significance? So as assessing officers, we would need to consider that if there was an impact and where we'd received further information from the applicant in terms of a viewshed analysis.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions on this one? Councillor Choi?
Thanks to Madam Deputy Mayor and to Director Shaw. So flowing on from that question then, because I've also had some feedback from residents in South Perth in particular. And so I just want to confirm, and I know I've probably asked me these questions behind the scenes before, but I thought it was important to raise them here as there's items now before us again. So firstly is, can the city please confirm how this policy applies to development of land on public open space, whether it be city-owned freehold land or Crown land managed by the city? Does it apply, and if so, how? If it doesn't apply, why not?
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. No, it doesn't apply to land reserved for public open space. So, for example, land on the foreshore, the policy doesn't apply because the local planning policy is created under the planning regulations, which apply to zoned land only. If there was ever a development application on the foreshore, it would be determined by the West Australian Planning Commission.
Thank you. Councillor Choi.
Thanks to Madam Deputy Mayor and to Director Shaw. So I understand the CEO discretion now mentioned under the R codes applies to single residential development applications and only to those. And so how might this policy still be applicable to other types of residential development applications, if at all?
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. For the reasons outlined in the report, the policy is not required in terms of the assessment of group dwellings. In respect to multiple dwellings, so apartment proposals, those applications are required to have submitted with them a local context plan to demonstrate details of views to and from the site, and we would consider that as part of the application. Those applications are also subject to review by the City's Design Review Panel that would consider the impact on amenity, including views.
Thank you. Councillor Choi.
Thanks again to Madam Deputy Mayor and to Director Shaw. Has the City ever had regard to this policy or required the design of a proposed residential development to be modified in light of this policy? And if not, why was it created and recommended to Council for endorsement by prior administrations?
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. No applications that I'm aware of, and in fact the policy itself says that if there was an impact to the view, the City wouldn't request the applicant modify the height to otherwise reduce impact on views.
Thank you, Director Shaw.
I think there was a second part to the question, which was why was the policy put forward and why has it changed? Well, I think going from 2008 was when the policy was established, and I think it was covered at the briefing that we had for elected members. Since then, there's been two particular changes to the Act and the regulations, which has meant that it isn't relevant.
Thank you. Councillor Choi.
Thanks to CEO Bradford and through the Chair to Director Shaw again. So my last question then, flowing on from all of that, is I went back to 2008, had a look at the original policy, which I believe was to supersede a previous policy on views, P373T. And the intention was for certain design considerations to be taken into account when a DA related to a property that had existing view significance, so as to preserve those views as where practicable. So my question is, irrespective of whether the City has previously considered or applied this policy to residential DAs in the past or not, will the City no longer have to consider applying this policy or anything else in terms of relevant design considerations if this policy is revoked?
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We wouldn't consider this policy if it was revoked, but in terms of views, we would in the application of section 5.1.6 of the R codes, which is building height, if there's a design review assessment, which specifically requires that the assessing officer consider access to views of significance.
Thank you, Director Shaw. Are there any further questions? Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So just for clarification purposes, the R codes will be dealing with single dwellings. So anything that's group dwelling would not actually be covered with regard to, sorry, not the R codes, with regard to the policy as it currently stands. So we'd only be applying this to single houses and dwellings. Is that correct?
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. No. It's applied more broadly. Well, it arguably should be applied more broadly, but it's not required because it's covered in both versions of the R codes, applying to single houses, group dwellings and apartments.
Okay, thank you. So with regard to the R codes as they currently stand, so it is prescriptive enough to actually deal with significant views. So based on the current policy that we've got, there's nothing in our policy that would actually provide any better protection or could be bolstered to actually support owners who have got a significant view. Is that correct?
Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. That's correct. And as the CEO correctly pointed out, since the policy was first adopted, there have been amendments and changes made to the R codes that provide the level of protection that I believe was originally intended by the policy.
Thank you, Director Shaw. And my final question, Could it be possible that our policy was in place before our code amendments that resulted in this situation, which of course is now redundant? So it's just a matter of removing redundant policy that's already got statutory guidance.
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you. Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? No. I might just ask two very short questions. First of all, we have had some discussion this evening in respect to consideration of various items, and I appreciate, Director Shaw, that you referred to the case of Warden and Mosman Park in terms of what is considered. However, my question relates to what would actually guide the assessing officer's consideration as to what is the bar that is acceptable and not acceptable in terms of approving a development that may impact upon views of significance if we don't have a policy to guide that.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So in terms of preserving access to existing views, there's not a requirement to maintain it in its entirety. In terms of what we would actually consider, we would receive a viewshed analysis that would determine the impact on the views themselves in terms of what views are already available from the site itself, what views would otherwise be obstructed as part of that, what extent of maintenance of the views would otherwise be retained or obstructed as part of that development, and then we would consider any variations that would otherwise be required to the development to address any impacts associated with views of significance. So a policy is not required for planners to undertake that assessment. We don't need that a framework in place in that respect to otherwise guide our assessment of the application, because there are multiple established cases, and we would undertake every other requirement in clause 67(2) of the R codes in terms of the objectives of the locality, impact on amenity, impact on streetscape, etc.
Okay, so effectively we need to just trust the planning officers in their assessment as to the what constitutes an acceptable level of impact.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. It's open to Council to obviously modify delegation if it doesn't trust the administration. However, that wouldn't extend to applications for single houses, as those authorisations have already been provided such that they're delegated to the CEO.
Sure. Okay, and just one further question. And I know that you referred to a number of cases, and I am aware of several of those. And my understanding is that the impact assessments are highly contestable. And so my concern is that without clear policy guidance, how will the officers make an objective and consistent decision, recognising the expectation of ratepayers that safeguards are in place to prevent legal challenges and to ensure that decision-making is made according to a set of objective criteria without having that policy setting out what that criteria is?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So there is actually established criteria, which, as mentioned before, is the extent of the access to the views of significance. Would it be appropriate to maintain those views of significance? And if so, does the proposed development maintain the access to the view of significance? In terms of the consistency of decision-making, the very nature of access to views of significance would need to be considered on a case-by-case basis, which is why we would receive a viewshed analysis to determine the actual impact of the proposal based on the bespoke design.
Thank you, Director Shaw. Any further questions on this item? Oh, Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. And just following on from your questions to Director Shaw, and I think that was one of the things I started asking about following the deputation this evening, is that, because we heard about criteria and guidance and all that, which are not apparently specified in the R codes, but which could be covered in the policy if we indeed wanted to amend the policy. But what I'm hearing now is, in responses, is that the city officers do actually have a set of criteria that they consistently apply to applications, and they use this, I think you said, a viewshed analysis. So I just wanted to get confirmation that is consistently applied to every single application that comes before the officers. Is that right?
Director Shaw?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, so if we receive a development application that appears to have an impact on a view of significance, we wouldn't accept the application until we received the viewshed analysis. We had the ability to request additional information under the planning regulations, and that's something that I don't think was provided at the time this policy was created. So we can receive that information from the applicant to enable us to undertake a full assessment to see what the potential impact could be.
Thank you. Councillor Choi.
Thanks, through the Chair to Director Shaw. So say if an existing resident had an issue and said, okay, well, we understand these criteria that you have, because you've said you've got these criteria that you use against every application, but we don't agree with one part of it that you've assessed and have deemed is appropriate. Are they able to then appeal that, or is there any sort of way for existing residents to sort of bring those criteria up with the planning officers and sort of say, well, hang on, how did you do that, and how does that apply to the other properties that hasn't been deemed appropriate? I'm just trying to work how that works in practice if you've got existing residents who may have an objection.
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So in practice, where there's a variation, so for example, building height, that results on an impact to a view of significance, we advertise the proposed development to the adjacent impacted neighbours for comment. During the course of the submission, we see what their concerns are in relation to the development and typically provide a copy of the concerns to the applicant and give the applicant the opportunity to amend their design to otherwise address the concerns raised by the applicant. Alternatively, if the applicant isn't prepared to amend the proposal to otherwise address the concerns, we still complete our statutory assessment, including the assessment of the viewshed analysis, to determine whether there is an impact on the view of significance and to what extent and whether that's appropriate. If it's the case that we form the view that it's not appropriate, we would recommend the application be refused. If the application was approved, there's no third-party rights of appeal in Western Australia, so the neighbours wouldn't be able to appeal the application to the State Administrative Tribunal.
Thank you. Councillor Prendeville.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just had a question to Director Shaw on the view sheet analysis. Just a little bit of clarification on this particular criteria. Is this something that is formalised and standard across planning departments in all local governments, or is it something that we use in the City South Perth? And is it formal in a sense that, if by chance you had a full staff turnover, new staff would come in, it would be there and they would use it?
Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. It's standard. It's an established test from the State Administrative Tribunal, so it's a case that's already been determined. So I would assume that every practising planner should be undertaking that level of assessment when considering this. So by way of example, we have an application that will likely be considered by Council next month, where the City has formed the view that the impact may not be appropriate, and so it requires a decision of Council. We also have applications that are going to the Development Assessment Panel, so Council's not the determining authority. However, we have included information within the Responsible Authority report, including an assessment against that test and providing details on whether we think it's appropriate or not.
Thank you, Director Shaw. Any further questions? No? Thank you, Mr Bradford. Oh. Yes, if somebody could please retrieve Councillor Navard, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. Item 10.3.2, Scheme Amendment number 1 to Local Planning Scheme number 7, Short-Term Rental Accommodation, final adoption. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider Scheme Amendment number 1 to Local Planning Scheme number 7 to update the scheme text to introduce new and revised land use classes and general definitions to facilitate state government reforms for short-term rental accommodation.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions on this item? No. Thank you, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. Item 10.3.3, 40 km/h residential speed zone limit proposal. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider progressing the 40 km/h speed limit on local roads project with the intention of reducing the severity of crashes and the likelihood of fatalities. The item is a priority transport and infrastructure project developed by the Perth Inner City Group. It aligns with the City of South Perth's Integrated Transport Plan 2021 to 2031 and the Government of Western Australia Road Strategy 2020 to 2030.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor D'Souza, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. On page 35 of the agenda, it cites a reduction to potentially 30 k's an hour, both in Angelo Street and also some access roads within Salter Point. Just confirming that's not within the scope of this report.
Do we have somebody who's able to answer that question?
Can you just point me to the specific reference?
So at the very bottom of page 35, the last paragraph, the plan suggests and goes on. And then the very last line, it cites narrow local access roads in the suburb of Salter Point to reduce vehicle speed.
I'll stand corrected, but I'm pretty sure that's a comment from the Integrated Transport Plan, which is not part of this proposal.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Choi, you have a question?
First of all, can I just declare an impartiality interest in this? Because one of my questions is, where exactly are these roads going to be? And I'm just wondering, maybe I've got an impartiality interest because I might know some residents that live on some of these local roads.
I'm pretty sure that it would be considered an interesting common. So, an interesting common. So it's yeah. So you don't need to declare an interest in it. In terms of the roads that are covered, I think we've had at the briefing in November last year, we displayed the maps in large format, and also they are in the attachments to this report, which show the roads that are considered to be local access roads.
Thank you. Councillor Choi?
Thanks through the chair to CEO Bradford. So I'm just wondering, first of all, has there been any sort of traffic monitoring undertaken over the past little while, including but not limited to data collection relating to traffic volumes, speeds and types of vehicles being used on our local roads? And if so, over what period of time? And is there any information that can be provided to councillors on that data?
I might help Mr Colgan out here a little bit. We collect lots of traffic and road data, which we use all of the time, but I'm not quite sure what you're asking or what the purpose of that would be.
Thank you, Councillor Choi, if you could clarify.
Yeah, thank you, to CEO Bradford. It's just that if we're going to propose that certain local roads be reduced to 40 kilometres, wouldn't that be based on data that's being collected for those local roads? Like, why would some local roads be chosen over others? Would that be based on the data that's being collected for those roads?
Yeah, thank you. On page 34 of the document, there's a existing speed and road safety issue with local access roads, and there's some data that's been collected and stated there. Okay.
Thank you, Director Colgan. Councillor Choi, you have a further question?
Yes, thanks, Deputy Mayor, and to Director Colgan. I'll have a look at that again a bit later, and if there's any further questions on further data, we'll send an email outside this meeting. So the other question I had is, I understand other local governments, including within the same inner city working group, have or are first undertaking a 12-month speed reduction trial with community consultation and feedback sought before any permanent speed reduction is implemented. So I'm just wondering why it seems that we're going straight to applying for the speed reduction, and why we wouldn't be following the similar processes that other local governments, including those in the working group, in terms of consultation first and trials and that kind of thing.
I'll have a go at answering it. And so the Perth Inner City Group is all participating in the same project. The draft wording of those reports where they talk about consultation, we've spoken to all of them. It's not clear what consultation they're actually going to do. And so it could be exactly the same as what we're proposing to do, which is to implement it and then review it afterwards and take feedback. So we're going through an informed process from an stakeholder engagement process. In terms of a trial, the City of Vincent has trialled this and it's implemented. Main Roads is of the view, I think, that they would not support, see a trial as necessary, but rather this is implementation and review.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Prendeville.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'm just wondering if the city has any comment on, I know earlier in the year, WA Premier came out with opposition to this, reducing the local roads to 40 kilometres an hour.
If I recall that, I think he was almost put on the spot and answered off the cuff. I'm not sure that was really a considered answer, especially in light of the accidents that have occurred in WA and the road safety issues that have emerged.
Thank you, Councillor Prendeville.
Thank you to CEO Bradford. Do we know if there has been any other discussions at that level about the work undertaken by the inner city groups for reducing the speed limit?
I understand it has the support of Main Roads and the Road Safety Commission.
Thank you, Councillor Prendeville.
Thank you, through the chair, to CEO Bradford. My last question is, we heard from a resident tonight about picking out particular roads. Is that an option, obviously maybe based on feedback, or are we committed to just blanket all roads down to 40 kilometres an hour?
Just to be really clear, it's important that councillors look at the maps that are provided, because it is not all roads down to 40 kilometres an hour. It is local access roads specifically, and so that's really important. If you actually have a look at those maps, you'll see that they are very much, those residential streets that are end of destination. In terms of the approach, the idea is to create a 40 kilometre an hour zone, and then which is then implemented across the entire district for those particular roads. That doesn't mean that all roads, so South Terrace, for example, Labouchere Road and those sorts of roads are not included. The way the report is worded is that we will review the implementation afterwards. So if after a year in that vicinity, we would consider any feedback that we get from residents and elected members in terms of if the change has created an issue, for example, created a rat run that didn't exist previously or something like that, then we would review appropriate speeds. And so that is open to us. But initially, it is to implement it across all of those particular roads. But again, I'll emphasise, it's not all roads.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And just following on from Councillor Prendeville's question, so from the city's recollections, because obviously I can't recall which roads are included or not included on that table that we're given, is the other roads that the COSPRA chair mentioned in her deputation night, are they included or could they be included?
I did try to have a look when they were mentioned. I think that I'll take it on notice, but I'm pretty sure that that Murray Street would be a road that would become 40 kilometres based on what I could see of the maps, but we'll take that on notice.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, are there any further questions relating to this item? I just have one, and it just arises out of the question of Councillor Choi and Councillor Prendeville. Obviously, Councillor Choi referred to traffic monitoring on local roads and whether we had any data. And of course, arising out of Councillor Prendeville's question, Mr Bradford, you answered in respect to the change in speed limit being supported by Main Roads WA and the Road Safety Commission, and that it would likely result in the reduction of accidents and road safety issues. Is it possible, and I understand this would need to be taken on notice, but is it possible for council to be provided with some data in respect to both traffic monitoring as well as accidents or road safety issues in respect to local access roads?
So there is a specific paragraph in the report on page 34 that actually provides certainly a summary, or I think a relevant summary of that, in terms of the speeds on local roads and also accidents on local roads. So I think that that's covered.
So I'm sorry, that table, does that only refer to local access roads, or does that also include sort of main distributor roads and some of the larger ones?
If I read it correctly, it's not just a table, it's actually a heading started halfway down the page on page 34 of 114. Is there an existing speeding and road safety issue on our local access roads is the heading of the paragraph.
Yes, sorry, I'm just seeking some data in respect to issues related to local access roads. So
that is the data.
That's the extent of the data that we have.
Well, it's not the extent of the data we have, that's the extent of the data and that is presented for local access roads. So that is for local access roads.
Sure, and we don't have any monitoring data that's able to be provided?
We have mountains of monitoring data, but I'm not sure what relevance it would be and for what purpose you would use it. This analysis is drawn from that data.
Right, okay. Any further questions, councillors? No. Okay, Mr Bradford, you can move on to the next item.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. Item 10.3.4, Collier Park Golf Course Development Agreements. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider the lease, development agreement and course controller agreement and authorise the Chief Executive Officer to execute the documents.
Thank you. Councillors, Councillor Choi, you have a question?
Yes, a couple. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. First of all, what sort of minor amendments are contemplated under paragraph 3 of the officer recommendation on page 38 of the agenda, where the CEO could modify the contracts without it coming back to council?
Thank you. Director Adams?
Yeah. So there's still a number of things that are just being finalised that don't affect the key terms of the agreement. So the things that we consider minor are the things that don't affect those key terms. So, yeah, there's a bit of tidying up and there's a bit of backwards and forwardsing around, some of the wording and there's a couple of minor issues to be resolved, but they're nothing that affect the key terms of the agreements. And those agreements are currently on the hub, so you can have a look through them and you can see that there's a fair bit to those agreements. So I guess my answer would be that it's anything that doesn't affect those key terms of the agreements that need to be adjusted because there's a couple of law firms involved who are advising us and obviously the other party their reviews often pick up some last minute changes that need to be made as well. So.
Thank you, Director Adams. Councillor Choi, another question?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and through the Chair to Director Adams. So what if one or more of the 3 separate agreements fall over? So what happens to the others? I know I've gone through the contracts, but I'm just trying to get an answer to that little portion of them. Like if, say, the development doesn't occur, but you've got the course control agreement, do they all collapse and is that provided for throughout the 3 contracts?
Yeah, so all of the possible scenarios are provided for within those agreements. So obviously if the development approval doesn't get through, then the other agreements can't proceed, and so we need to make changes to those other agreements as well, which would then require a whole nother round of negotiations and a whole nother approval of council and club links as well. So the development approval being approved by WAPC is something that's integral to all the agreements. Within the other agreements, there are cross-termination clauses, that if certain things happen and one agreement gets terminated, then the others get terminated as well. So the lawyers have ensured that the city's interests, our lawyers have ensured that the city's interests are protected, and similarly, Club Link's lawyers are trying to ensure that their interests are protected as well. So I think we've got to a point where both parties are comfortable with how those agreements interact with each other. But there is a fair bit of pain for both parties if the development agreement isn't, if the development approval doesn't go through.
Thank you, Director Adams. Councillor Choi.
Thanks for the chair to Director Adams. So I'm gathering that's the same with breach of contract. If either party breaches one of the contracts, then they're all basically going to be affected by that breach.
Director Adams?
So, sorry, can you just repeat that question?
So I guess in the same vein, if one of the contracts is breached by either party, then it potentially is going to affect the other two contracts as well, because they're all interrelated.
Yes. So essentially, I mean, the development agreement only has a finite life beyond, but beyond that, the other two agreements operate intertwined for 21 years. And they have, if one ceases, then the other one ceases. And there's a number of causes for termination, but obviously, there's also clauses in there about, what breaches, or what constitutes a breach for either party, and how those breaches are then to be handled, rectified, and then obviously consequences if they're not rectified, leading to termination. So, and then they also deal with what happens if an agreement's terminated, and how do we go forward after that. So, so we believe that everything's covered, and the lawyers believe that everything's covered.
Thank you, Director Adams. Any further questions? No. Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Oh, Councillor Choi, one more question.
Sorry, I was going to let someone else have a go. Thought there was more questions to come out from other councillors. So my last question is just in relation to the schematic drawings. I'm just trying to work out why they're confidential, because I can't see why they'd be commercially confidential. Because you've included some drawings in the report, but so I'm not sure why the schematic drawings are actually in the confidential part of the report aren't also public.
Because they are produced by an architectural firm for the purpose of being used by us and a third party. They're not for, us and the other party. They're not for, publishing. So we've, I've sought, agreement to use those ones that I've put in the report. But obviously, as we go further down the track and we're, preparing more detailed drawings that show exactly what things are going to look like, and we can then, release those for public consumption. But there will be further consultation on the way about, how some of these designs take place in. Referring to the detailed design process. So, there'll be further opportunities for us to release information, and we'll do that as we can. But obviously, we don't want to create expectations around certain things and then change them. So once we get to final drawings, we'll probably have the ability to release more then.
Thank you, Director Adams. No further questions? Thank you, Mr. Bradford.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. Item 10.3.5, Draft Local Planning Policy, Unhosted Short-Term Rental Accommodation, Final Adoption and Revocation of Policy 350.18, Short-Term Accommodation. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider adopting amended local planning policy, Unhosted Short-Term Rental Accommodation, following advertising.
Thank you. Councillors, do we have any questions relating to this item? Councillor Choi.
Yeah, just one. Is the city aware of other unregistered short stay accommodations in the complex where this this unit is, and if so,
Sorry, Councillor Choi, we're just referring to the policy, which is 10.3.5.
No. I've skipped ahead. Sorry.
No questions relating to this one. I have just a couple, and it sort of largely arises out of the deputation this evening. It has come to my attention just this afternoon that I actually presented an alternate motion in November 2024, amending some words. One was from will only be considered to will generally not be supported under the locational criteria. And the second line was amending the and to be an or. So it came to my attention this afternoon that the amendments were not included in the advertised policy and have been the subject of criticism and a basis as to why the locational criteria ought to be excluded. So my question is, I guess firstly, I'm trying to understand how a policy that I had passed did not make it to being advertised, and whether this is in compliance with the planning and development regulations. Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. It was an administrative error. It's open to council to re-advertise the policy. The policy itself, in terms of how it was advertised, is in accordance with the planning regulations. It wouldn't otherwise be in accordance with council's resolution, which isn't covered under the planning and development regulations. In terms of the impact of the locational criteria, I've mentioned to, I think last time I spoke to this item, and it's on the agenda as well tonight at item 10.3.2, council has separately initiated a scheme amendment that makes the land use an A use within all residential zones or all residential areas throughout the district. So in the first instance, applications can be made for short-term rental accommodation across the entire district, and whether the city agrees with that view or not, that's something that's been directed by the state government. Council had to initiate that scheme amendment that provides for this land use everywhere. So that's just something to keep in mind with the locational criteria. However, it is open for council to include locational criteria or amend the existing locational criteria as it sees fit, and the city will then seek to apply that criteria.
Thank you. Following on from that, you did say that it was open to council to re-advertise. However, would this be something that you would consider could be considered a minor amendment and able to be modified without further advertisement?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, it would. We only received one submission specifically in relation to the impact of the locational criteria, which wouldn't change based on whether it was an and or an or.
Thank you, Director Shaw. Any further questions? Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just wanted to understand the process. I thought the advice from admin when we passed this back in November to advertise was to include locational criteria, and there's nothing that I can see from the response from the community that would suggest it should be changed from what we advertised. So I'm just confused as to why we said put it in, now it's been taken out again, even though we already kind of had this debate.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So it's a requirement for the administration to provide advice as part of its reports to council. So council had included in its resolution that the locational criteria be included. It's my professional opinion that it should be removed, and it would be remiss of me to not provide that advice in the subsequent report. We have also received a submission specifically on locational criteria, in that it was opposed to trying to limit the location of short-term rental accommodation to activity centres, given the impact that they may have on property values and the ability for permanent occupants in areas close to areas of amenity.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I understand the advice in the agenda report, but the actual draft policy, it's been struck out. So does that not go beyond advice?
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. No, it's the officer's recommendation that it be removed. It is open to council to reinsert that.
Thank you. So I'll just ask one further question based on that. I know that, Director Shaw, you referred to one submission that had been received and in particular values being impacted. Now, it's my understanding that values are not a relevant planning consideration.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, that's correct. Council is only required to consider the submission, not necessarily comply with what's been requested in the submission.
Thank you, Director Shaw. Councillors, are there any further questions? Councillor Choi. I'll go Councillor Navard, thank you.
I was just wondering about the whole processes. If council puts a policy in place, even if it isn't entirely what the planning department is recommending, would it still have the strength of requesting the city to apply due regard when they were making assessment in relation to these kinds of decisions?
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. That's correct. So including locational criteria wouldn't have the effect of blocking applications being received because of the land use permissibility as part of the scheme amendment. So in practice, we would receive a development application. If it varied the locational criteria within the policy, we would consider the justification provided by the applicant as to why it should depart from that policy requirement and make a discretionary recommendation on whether it was appropriate to depart from that locational criteria or not. Typically what happens in that instance is the application would then be presented to council for a decision.
Thank you, Director Shaw. Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm not sure if this is relevant or not, but just taking on board all the questions and responses that we've just received on this item. And looking at the agenda, and I know we've got a number of short-term rental accommodation applications that we have been asked to approve next week. So were those applications assessed against the policy that council updated and endorsed, or against what was advertised? And also, I guess, the previous agenda items as well last month, or since the advertising happened. Also, sorry, since council endorsed the updated policy.
Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, they were. That assessment is included in the reports themselves, because from memory, the last two applications that had been considered by council, that was the only variation to the policy, and so the city presented them to council for their consideration.
Thank you, Director Shaw. Are there any further questions on this item? No? Okay, thank you, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. Item 10.3.6, proposed change of use, multiple dwelling to unhosted short-term rental accommodation, Lot 8, number 8/5, Clarence Street, South Perth, Section 31, reconsideration. The purpose of this report is for council to consider its previous decision to refuse a development application for a change of use from multiple dwelling to unhosted short-term rental accommodation at Lot 8, number 8/5, Clarence Street, South Perth, under Section 31 of the State Administrative Tribunal Act 2004. For the reasons outlined in the report, the application is recommended for approval.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Choi, you have a question?
There's a couple of things, Deputy Mayor. So first of all, I understand there's been a couple of changes made to the management plan since the last time this was presented to council. I just wanted to know if the City Administration could kindly just give us a brief rundown on what those, I guess, improvements may be in order to mitigate some of the concerns that the opponents to the application may have had last year.
Thank you, Director Mullins.
Thank you, through the Chair. Yes, the details are actually contained within the report in Section C, description of the proposal. So in regards to the previous management plan, contact details have been updated. So previously we had a single emergency contact, and now we have two alternative contact details, and there's actually a total of three. So that's two additional alternate contact details. and mitigation of complaints, in addition to the noise monitoring device, which the applicant previously advised they would install. Additional information included to guests in relation to noise in the management plan states that no portable music is allowed on the balcony during quieter hours between 9 p.m. to 8 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Mullins. Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and to Ms Mullen. So the question I was trying to ask before, sorry, when I was out of order, is the city aware of any other unregistered short stay units in that same complex, and is the city able to do anything about that? Because we did hear about that in the deputations this evening.
Thank you, Director Mullins.
Thank you, through the chair. The city is aware of only 4 registered unhosted short-term rental accommodation users within the property. We're not aware of any that aren't actually registered with DMIRS.
Thank you, Director Mullins. Any further questions, councillors? No. Thank you, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. Item 10.3.7, proposed change of use, grouped dwelling to unhosted short-term rental accommodation, Lot 4, number 4/30, Axford Street, Como. The purpose of this report is to consider an application development approval for a change of use from a group dwelling to unhosted short-term rental accommodation on Lot 4, number 4/30, Axford Street, Como. This item was previously considered by Council at its meeting held 25 February. However, the item lapsed for want of a seconder. As a determination was not made in accordance with Clause 68(2) of the Planning and Development Local Planning Schemes Regulation 2015, the item is represented to Council for a decision. For the reasons outlined in the report, it is recommended the application be approved, subject to a condition.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions on this item? No? Okay, Mr Bradford.
Item 10.3.8, proposed change of use, multiple dwelling to use lot not listed, carers respite accommodation, Lot 34, number 35/87, South Perth, Esplanade. The purpose of this report is to consider an application for development approval for a change of use from a multiple dwelling to use not listed, carers respite accommodation on Lot 34, number 35/87, South Perth, Esplanade, South Perth. The item is referred to Council as the proposed land use falls outside of the delegation to officers. For the reasons outlined in the report, it is recommended the application be approved, subject to a condition.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors. Councillor Choi, you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. So we heard a deputation this evening, a couple of them actually on this item, got me thinking. Could this potentially be setting a precedent? Because this is not a short-term accommodation application we're considering, it's a change of use for a unit in a complex. I'm just wondering, I know it all has to be like presented and taken on a case-by-case merit basis, but I'm just wondering, is it potentially setting a precedent for not only this complex, but other apartments in the area for changing the use of the apartment from residential to something else?
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. As you correctly pointed out, you've been listening to my rants, you do need to consider every application on its individual merits on a case-by-case basis, so it wouldn't set a precedent. A use not listed application is considered a complex application under the regulations, and it would be presented to Council for consideration.
Thank you, Director Shaw. Councillor Prenderville, you have a question?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just referring back to the 2 deputations that we had, there seemed to be conflicting views on the safety of the building and signage and all of that sort of thing. So I just wanted to hear from the city in terms of how we see that building meeting standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So planning legislation needs to be treated separately to the application of all other legislation. And so it's not that the owners would otherwise not comply with other requirements of legislation, it's just that it's not a relevant consideration in the determination of this application. But in terms of the comments that were made in terms of the National Construction Standard, that can only be applied where works are proposed or to a new building. So the city can't otherwise retrospectively ensure that the entire building complies with the application. with the NCC. But as we've heard from the applicant tonight, they've provided relevant information in terms of access and safety standards, which I'm sure they'd provide to the occupants prior to them using the respite accommodation.
Thank you, Director Shaw. Councillor Choi.
Thank you to, through the chair, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, bit of a mouthful. And just following on from Councillor Prendeville's question and Director Shaw's response, isn't it true to say that it's actually up to the occupant and the managing agent to ensure safety, that the occupants are aware of the safety standards or what they might need to be aware of, like in any unit complex, not just this particular unit for this particular purpose. Is that right? It's not really up to the city or council to consider this, is it?
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, that's correct, except in the instance that the public building regulations would otherwise be applicable, which they wouldn't in this case.
Thank you, Director Shaw. Councillors, are there any further questions on this item? Councillor Brandis.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just a couple of questions with regard to this item. So the Deputy this evening spoke about a Class 2 building on a few occasions. Does that have any bearing with regard to this application at all?
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We haven't undertaken assessment in that respect, but I would say it's likely to be a Class 1A or Class 1B, depending on the number of occupants at any given time.
Thank you very much, Director Shaw. So if they are categorised as Class 1, 1A or Class 2, are there any further considerations that we may need to give with regard to considering this application?
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. No, because as previously mentioned, the city can't retrospectively apply the requirements of the National Construction Code. If they were intending to do works as part of the proposal or some sort of new development, we would ensure that it was brought up to code.
Thank you. Councillor Brandis.
Thank you, Director Shaw. So just to clarify that point, so because of the age of the building, and I think it was mentioned it was built in 1970, if it complied with the standards in the day and nothing was modified to a more modern new form, then there's nothing non-compliant or that needs our consideration.
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, that's correct. But also as it relates to this development application in itself, which isn't proposing works.
Thank you. Councillor Brandis.
Thank you very much, Director Shaw. And one final question, just with regard to the safety concerns, which we've obviously had a question on tonight. So we heard about things like smoke alarms, fire detectors, fire escapes. Is there any onus on us to inspect, report, or to ask another agency to look into that? Where does that sort of fall? Whose remits that with?
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. There's no requirement on the city because it's not considered to be a public building, so we wouldn't be undertaking inspections in that respect. The onus is on the landowner to ensure compliance with all other codes and requirements.
Thank you, Director Shaw. Okay, no further questions on this item? Mr Bradford.
Item 10.3.9, proposed change of use, multiple dwelling to unhosted short-term rental accommodation, number 9/1 Western Avenue, South Perth. The purpose of this report is to consider an application for development approval for a change of use from a multiple dwelling to unhosted short-term rental accommodation on Lot 9, number 9/1 Western Avenue, South Perth. The item is referred to Council as the proposed land use falls outside of the delegation to officers. For the reasons outlined in the report, it is recommended that the application be approved, subject to a condition.
Thank you. Councillors, do we have any questions on this item? No. Okay, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. Item 10.3.10, proposed change of use, single house to unhosted short-term rental accommodation, Lot 8, number 7 Henley Street, Como. The purpose of this report is to consider an application for development approval for a change of use from a single house to unhosted short-term rental accommodation on Lot 88, number 7 Henley Street, Como. The item is referred to Council as the proposed land use falls outside of the delegation to officers. For the reasons outlined in the report, it is recommended that the application be approved, subject to a condition.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. There's a table on page 86. and in the right-hand column it says assessment, and it says that it's doesn't comply with our location requirements in our draft policy, but it's near a high-frequency bus route, being Canning Highway. Isn't pretty much every single dwelling in the city of South Perth pretty close to Canning Highway, Manning Road, Mill Point Road or Lavishie Road, and therefore pretty much everything is close to a high-frequency bus route?
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So the site's within a centre zone in itself, so it's within the 400 metres because it's located within the Canning Bridge Activity Centre Plan area. The intent of that was to clarify that should the occupants be seeking to travel to tourist destinations, there's a high-frequency bus route in that location. So everywhere in the district has predominantly access to high frequency. So again, it's just presented as information for council to consider whether it would like to approve it on that basis or not.
Thank you, Director Shaw. Councillor, is there any further questions on this item? No? Okay, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. Item 10.3.11, proposed change of use, multiple dwelling to unhosted short-term rental accommodation. Lot 11, number 111/29 Melville Parade, South Perth. The purpose of this report is to consider an application for development approval for a change of use from a multiple dwelling to unhosted short-term rental accommodation on Lot 11, number 111/29 Melville Parade, South Perth. The item is referred to Council as the proposed land use falls outside of the delegation to officers. For the reasons outlined in the report, it is recommended that the application be approved subject to a condition.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions in relation to this item? Nope. Okay, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. Item 10.4.1, listing of payments February 2025. This report presents to Council a list of accounts paid under delegated authority between 1 and 28 February 2025 for information. It also includes purchase card transactions between 1 January and 31 January in line with new legislative requirements.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions relating to this item? Nope. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. Item 10.4.2, monthly financial statements, February 2025. The monthly financial statements are provided within the attachments A through I, with a high level of analysis contained in the comments of the report.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions relating to this item? No. Okay, thank you, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. Item 10.4.3, Electors General Meeting 23-24. This report allows Council to consider the outcome of the Electors General Meeting held Tuesday 4 February 2025.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions relating to this item? No. Thank you, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. Item 10.5.1, Independent Facilitator for the Chief.
My apologies. We were moving too fast for you. Councillor Prendeville, did you have a question relating to item 10.4.3?
I do, and I'm happy to take this on notice. It's a bit of a roundabout question, but I understand that. Oh, you know what? Don't worry about it. I'll have a. Yeah, I'll ask offline. Sorry, it's too long-winded. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prendeville. Mr Bradford.
Item 10.5.1, Independent Facilitator for the Chief Executive Officer Evaluation Process 24-25. This report seeks the appointment of an external independent facilitator for the CEO evaluation process for the period 1 July to 30 June 2025. Item 10.5.1, Independent Facilitator for the CEO evaluation process was deferred to the March Ordinary Council meeting at the Ordinary Council meeting held on the 25th of February 2025. In light of the fact that I've resigned, this report is now presented to Council to formally conclude the process with a recommendation not to appoint an independent facilitator for the CEO evaluation process 24-25.
I don't think we're going to have any questions relating to that item. Fantastic, thank you. Right, motion, that brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is motions of which previous notice has been given, and this evening there are nil. It also brings us to item 15, where the meeting would ordinarily be closed to the public, but we do not have anything for behind closed doors tonight. And then I move to item number 16, which is closure. So I declare the meeting closed at 8:42 p.m. and I thank you all for your attendance.